Uh, my name's Lemn Sissay. I write poetry. It's the voice at the back of the mind. It's nothing more, nothing less than that. It doesn't pretend to be anything more or anything less than that. Poetry, I believe, is all around us. It's extremely popular. It was there before CNN, before the BBC, before Sky News, and it'll be there after CNN, after Sky News, and after the BBC. It is the voice at the back of the mind. I have 7 minutes, and whichever the way you look at it, the voice at the back of the mind is where the real you is. However we present ourselves on the outer self, whatever we dress like, however, wherever we live, whatever we do, the real us is tucked away perfectly there, and that's where poetry comes from, and that's where I come from. 23 years ago, I walked down this street I can't really believe I'm here, to two houses that way, or about 3 houses that way, to a place called the Children's Legal Centre, which was on the sixth floor there. And I'd come from a children's home in Wigan. I was born in 1960, and my foster mother, my mother approached I'm not on drugs, by the way, for anybody who's, but my foster mother, maybe I shouldn't have said that joke, you know what I mean? But if you want anyway, I'll be outside. No, maybe I shouldn't have said that either. In fact, maybe we should split up into small groups and discuss whether that was a relevant joke within this environment. But to do that, we'll need a worker to administrate the process. To get a worker, we'll have to apply for funding. So we'll split up into small groups. We'll get a finance committee to come back to the central management committee, and we'll need a constitution, and etc. Finally, we'll get the worker to administrate the process as to whether that was actually a funny joke or not, and I should say in this environment. But it turns out the worker's a wanker. You know, we got capital funding and everything. So what we'll have to do is to set up a different organisation to administrate the process as to whether that was relevant within this particular environment. 1967, mother comes to this country, has me fostered to a social worker for a short period of time while she studied. The social worker gives me to Christian foster parents and says to them, treat this as an adoption. We'll get her to sign. They keep me for 11 years. 11 years. By 11 years, they decide the devil is inside of me, and they put me into children's homes. The staff in the children's homes hold me for the next 7 years until they're no longer responsible for me. At 18 years old, they let me go. No Christmases, no birthdays, no weekends, no Saturdays, no Sundays. If you want to know what family is, have it taken away from you from birth for 18 years. If you want to know how important breathing is, it happens when your breathing is taken away from you. Otherwise, you don't think about it, and neither should you. I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy for them to know how important family actually is. At 18 years old, I'm given my birth certificate. My name is Lemn Sissay. The name that I thought was mine up until then was Norman. The social worker had named me illegally after himself. The social services had to legally give me my birth certificate, and I had no family to give it to, and it said Lemn Sissay on it. I spent all of my adult life searching for my family, my mother, my father, my sisters, my brothers, my aunts, my uncles. I watched little children run away from their parents, like crawl away and look back. And it's the looking back, the contextualizing of you that you do throughout your life to those central people in your life, whether you like them or not, whether you love them, whether they abused you. You have a point of, it's all relative. You have a point of context. It's why mums say, bring us your washing when you're 40. I only know that not because I've had children, but because I didn't have it. I spent all of my life searching for my family while writing books, making documentaries, proving what happened to me as a child, and writing books of poetry and traveling the world, and somehow I did it. My name is Lemn Sissay. Lem is Amharic for why. My mother The social worker gave me letters from my mother pleading for me back in 1968 to the social worker whose name was Norman. My mother married the Vice Minister to Finance under the Emperor Haile Selassie. My father was a pilot for Ethiopian Airlines. My grandfather was a millionaire. There's a lot of love in them, and it doesn't matter what they had. It was all taken away in the revolution anyway. I found them all across the world. Now I have a fully dysfunctional family, just like everybody else. Thank God for that. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Lemn Sissay. I would like to invite onto the stage the person who invited me here, who gave away the 7 minutes of her time for me to speak to you. I'm artist in residence at the South Bank Centre. Facebook me. There's only one of me in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Kate Dardy.
So I'm here this evening to talk to you about the memory of objects. Can I have the first slide, please? When I went to see the Turin Shroud in 1998, I was interested, most of all, in the reaction that people had to the Turin Shroud. It was very strange because people were coming out furiously angry, saying that it was all a conspiracy. They were in tears of joy. They were so happy that they had at last been able to see this beautiful object. And it, in fact, seemed to hold up a mirror to them. I'm going to try and get this off. No? Next slide, please. Then here is the mirror of Lucretia Borgia. When this is on permanent hiding at the Victoria and Albert Museum, where it lives in the cellar, along with 90% of the collection. Thank you. Thanks very much. And I was very interested to go and see this because I wanted to see if the looking glass might take me back into the 16th century world of Lucretia Borgia, or perhaps it would be like in Lost Highway, where I would look at myself in this looking glass and, in fact, the face of Lucretia Borgia would look back. Sadly, that did not happen. Next slide, please. Here's another lifeless object, which is the body of Mao Zedong in Tiananmen Square. 8 million people a year come to see this object. And you have to be frisked. There's a full body search to be allowed in to see the body of Mao Zedong. Next slide, please. Here, however, is a very beautiful object. This is the finger of the Buddha, which was brought to China by the Empress Wu in the 9th century. These are 4 of a series of 7 beautiful golden chased boxes. And there's the little finger. This is an object which has so much resonance for the people that they actually worship the ground around this finger. Next slide, please. Here is a piece of the true cross. Whether or not it really is a piece of the true cross is by now almost irrelevant, because for the last couple of thousand years, it has been worshipped as if it were the true cross. And so this object has so many memories for so many people. It's heard the prayers and thoughts and most intimate wishes of many, many people. And therefore, it is an extraordinary object full of memory for many people. But anyway, here I am talking about life and death. I know that what you all really want to know is, where did I get my dress? Next slide, please. eBay. It's my favorite place. My friend Grant and I have a competition with one another of who can buy the cheapest and most entertaining dress on eBay. Needless to say, I'm always the winner, otherwise I wouldn't have mentioned the competition. I'm not only the winner because I'm extremely cheap, but I'm also the winner because Grant very kindly always gives me whatever he wins. This dress comes from Wisconsin, Ohio. It was worn to a dance in 1968 by a woman who subsequently tried to give it to several members of her family, all of whom refused. And she then sold it on eBay for, I think, about $7. Is that right, Grant? Anyway, it cost more to send it from the States than it did to buy it. Next slide, please. Yes, if this dress could talk, I think it would have a tale or two to tell. But these objects are actually extremely interesting. These are 3,000-year-old oracle bones and tortoise shell bones that were used to predict the future by ancient Chinese shamans. They would take the scapulae, note my fabulous Latin conjunctions, and the tortoise shells, and they would put them in the dying embers of a fire. And in accordance with how the bones and shells cracked, they would foresee the future. They would then write on these little shards what they had been able to predict in the future. So, next slide, please. This was the beginning of Chinese writing. They then have been writing on objects ever since they started writing on shells and bones. Here is a beautiful vase from about 1600 BC. You can see on the rim of the vase here on the right the inscription, which says who made it and for whom. Next slide, please. Here is a square Hu vase with a 400-character poetic inscription, which commemorates a battle that took place and that was wanting to be celebrated. Next slide, please. Here is a painting by the celebrated court painter of the 10th, 11th century Sung dynasty, who's called Guo Xi. You can see here also there have been many stamps and inscriptions. There's a poem at the top of praise for the object, and there are several collector's seals. So this allows us to follow the history of the object through its own self. You can see who owned the object. Next slide, please. Here you can see another beautiful painting. This is called Sitting by a Stream, where there are, I think, 12 or 13 different owners have inscribed their poems of praise on the painting. And there are also many collector's seals as well. Next slide, thanks. This is by Zhao Mengfu, who is a late 13th century painter, drawing in ink. And these are, I think there are 39 seals here, all from different collectors, so that you can follow the history of the object through several hundred years. Next slide, please. They wrote on everything. They wrote poems about everything. Here's somebody who's written on an 18th century bamboo wrist rest, there on the left, saying, I don't know what, this is such a fabulous wrist rest that I wanted to write a poem on it. Here is a rhinoceros cup with another inscription that you can't see. Next, please. There's an inkstone, a fan, a horrible kind of teapot. Next slide, please. And all of that is completely ordinary for the Chinese to write on their objects. This is the Emperor Qianlong, who was the 18th century emperor of China. He was quite a guy. He was next slide please, so obsessed with his objects that he had portraits painted of them. These are his favorite objects. There are several more on different scrolls. Many of them have ended up at the Percival David Foundation. My friend Daniel tells me that in the 1970s, the curator of the Percival David Foundation, in her wisdom, decided that she would get rid of the annoying 18th century stands and chuck them all in the dustbin and replace them with some nice Perspex ones. Next slide, please. Here are a couple of the objects which I believe are on that scroll. And here you can see on the two pieces of writing are poems of praise written by the Emperor Qianlong himself on the object. Next, please. Here he is. He's written 34 poems between 1745 and 1793 on this painting of Mount Pan. But what's this got to do with me and you? Well, I, as an artist, write on objects following this Chinese tradition. There are all sorts of objects that I write on. Some have more or less resonance, like national flags, or baby shoes, or engagement rings, or wedding dresses. When my friend Grant found an amazing wedding dress that was quite new in a charity shop on the King's Road, he brought it over to my sitting room, and we sat and looked at it, and we were just so appalled and shocked and upset that somebody would have wanted to get rid of their wedding dress, that somebody had such violent feelings towards their wedding dress that they wanted it out of the house and that they were going to take it to the charity shop. We thought, who could possibly feel so strongly against their wedding dress? Who would be unable to live with it? And we thought perhaps a widow from one of the wars that we seem to be constantly engaged in. You see these photographs in the papers when these young soldiers die, and they're often on their wedding day. The bride, so beautiful and full of happiness and hope, and you think, it occurred to us that maybe girls like that might not find it easy to have their wedding dress hanging in their cupboard. We wondered what poem to write on it. There are, just for everyone to remember, there are 332 British soldiers who've died in Afghanistan since the beginning of the war there. And there are over 7,000 British soldiers who've died in Iraq. That's not counting the countless deaths in the Allied forces and on the opposite side. I thought it might be an interesting thing to write a poem about war down the back of a wedding dress so that we could remember the loss of these soldiers and the hole that they've left in their families. So I'm going to end my intervention, with, next please, a poem by this man, Wilfred Owen, who was born in 1893 in Shropshire, and who wrote many beautiful poems. He was published after his death by Siegfried Sassoon, and he died 7 days before the end of the First World War. So here's his poem with which I'd like to end my intervention, if I can hold a microphone and read aloud at the same time. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. Gas, gas, quick boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling, and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the frost-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory, the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori.